The year was 2187 and humanity was still new to the stars. Earth had joined the Galactic Council only 15 years ago, and most alien species looked at humans like children who had just learned to walk. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, the Horizon's Edge, and watched the stars stream past. His crew was small but good at their jobs. Lisa Grant handled the piloting with steady hands. Danny Cole kept the engines running smooth. Karen White managed the medical bay. Peter Hayes studied everything they found with eager eyes. They were out here in the Kelmar Nebula doing survey work and mapping new systems. It was routine work, but Jake liked it that way. No drama and no danger, just the quiet work of exploring the unknown. Then the distress signal came through and everything changed. Lisa picked it up first and her face went pale. The signal was Vadrian, and that made Jake sit up straight. The Vadrians were old and wise and powerful. Their civilization had been flying through space for 40,000 years before humans even invented the wheel. They had helped create the Galactic Council itself. If a Vadrian ship was in trouble, then something had gone very wrong. Jake ordered Lisa to change course and head for the signal. They found the Lightweaver drifting dead in space. The Vadrian ship was 10 times bigger than the Horizon's Edge, but it looked like a corpse. Scorch marks covered its hull and its engines were dark. Jake opened a channel and an old Vadrian face appeared on the screen. His name was Threnval, and he was an elder counselor. His voice was calm, but Jake could hear the fear underneath. A solar flare had hit them hard and fried their systems. Life support was failing and they had maybe 8 hours left. Their rescue ships were 3 days away. 60 Vadrians were going to die unless someone helped them right now. Jake looked at his tiny ship and did the math in his head. The Horizon's Edge was built for 5 people and maybe a few guests. 60 Vadrians would pack them in like cargo. The air would go bad, and the power would fail, and they might all die trying. Lisa saw his face and shook her head. Danny said it was impossible. Karen said the life support couldn't handle it. Peter just looked scared. Jake made his decision anyway. He told them to prepare to take on all 60 Vadrians because they were not going to leave anyone to die out here in the dark. His crew stared at him like he had lost his mind, but they started working. The next 3 days were hell. Danny Cole ripped apart half the ship to build extra life support. Karen White turned the cargo bays into sleeping areas. They brought the Vadrians over in groups and packed them into every corner of the ship. The corridors filled with bodies. The cargo bay filled with bodies. Even the engine room had Vadrians sitting against the walls. The air started to smell bad within hours. The temperature dropped because they had to divert power to keep everyone breathing. The lights flickered on and off. Jake stayed on the bridge and barely slept. Lisa kept them moving toward the nearest station, but her hands shook from exhaustion. On the second day, she collapsed at her post but refused to leave. Danny worked 30 hours straight, fixing things that kept breaking down. He got burned when a power coupling exploded but kept working anyway. Karen moved through the ship giving out water and checking on people. Peter monitored the systems and called out warnings every time something started to fail. The Vadrians stayed quiet and calm even though they must have been terrified. Threnval walked through the ship and spoke softly to his people. He told them that these humans were giving everything to save them. He told them to remember this day. On the 3rd day, the engines started making a sound that Danny said was very bad. The life support was running at 200% capacity and threatening to burn out. The air was so thin that everyone was gasping. Jake had to decide whether to push harder and risk everyone or slow down and let people suffocate. He pushed harder. When the Vadrian rescue ships finally appeared on the sensors, Lisa actually cried. They limped into docking range and the Vadrians transferred over to their own ships. All 60 of them survived. Every single one. The Horizon's Edge looked like a disaster. Half the systems were fried. The crew was so exhausted they could barely stand. Jake and his people spent a week in the hospital recovering. Threnval came to visit Jake on the 2nd day. The old Vadrian sat beside the bed and put his hand on Jake's shoulder. His eyes were ancient and wise and sad. He spoke slowly so Jake would understand through the painkiller fog. He said that the Vadrian people would never forget what humanity had done. He said that if humans ever faced their darkest hour, the Vadrians would stand with them. He said this was a debt of honor that would never expire. Jake barely remembered the conversation later. He was too tired and too drugged and too relieved that everyone had lived. To him, it had just been the right thing to do. You don't leave people to die when you can save them. That was all. 5 decades passed and Jake Morrison retired from active service. He became an instructor and taught young officers about emergency rescue operations. Most people forgot about the Lightweaver incident. Life went on and humanity kept growing among the stars. Then the Krell swarm came. They appeared from beyond the galaxy like a plague of locusts made of crystal and hunger. They did not talk or negotiate or show any mercy. They just consumed everything and moved forward. 3 civilizations fell in the first month. The Galactic Council sent its fleets, but the Krell were different from any enemy they had ever fought. Energy weapons barely scratched them. Missiles exploded against their ships and did nothing. Admiral Kyle Shaw commanded Earth's fleet, and he sent 30 ships to help the Council forces. They met the Krell at Sigma Station, protecting a cluster of inhabited worlds. The battle was a nightmare. Krell ships just kept coming and coming. Council ships exploded one after another. Shaw watched his sensors and felt cold fear in his gut. Lieutenant Amy Brooks was his tactical officer, and she noticed something about how the Krell moved. She said their crystal structure might be weak against kinetic weapons. Shaw ordered every human ship to switch to railguns and mass drivers, the old primitive weapons that most species had stopped using centuries ago. It worked. Human railguns punched through Krell hulls and shattered them into pieces. But there were too many of them, and human ships were not built as tough as alien vessels. Shaw lost 8 ships in the first hour. The Resilience took heavy damage and fires burned on 3 decks. The defense line was breaking, and Shaw knew they were about to lose. Then jump points opened all around them. Hundreds of them, Vadrian ships poured through like an avalanche. Their fleet was massive and ancient and powerful. They hit the Krell from the side and tore into them with weapons that humanity had never seen before. Threnval's voice came over every channel in the battle. He said that 50 years ago humans had stood for Vadrians when they faced death. Today Vadrians would stand for humans. The combined tactics worked like magic. Human kinetic weapons broke the Krell ships open. Vadrian shields protected the human vessels while they reloaded. Together they smashed the swarm and drove it back. Sigma Station was saved. But the war was far from over. Intelligence reports came in over the next week, and they were terrifying. The Krell had changed their strategy. They were bypassing the big battles and heading straight for Earth. 3 swarm groups were moving toward the Sol system. Over 1,000 ships. The Council forces were spread too thin, fighting on other fronts. Most species were defending their own homeworlds and could not spare any ships. Earth stood alone. Admiral Shaw gathered every ship he could find, and that was only 70 vessels against 1,000 Krell. The government started evacuation procedures, but there was no way to move 9 billion people in time. Captain Nicole Sanders commanded the Carrier Guardians Watch and set up defensive formations around Mars. Commander Chris Murphy prepared his bomber squadrons for suicide runs. Colonel Laura Mitchell got the ground forces ready, knowing that if the Krell landed, it meant the end of everything. Shaw sent one final message to the Galactic Council. He did not ask for help. He just told them that humanity would fight to the last breath. On Earth, old Jake Morrison sat with his granddaughter Emma, who served on one of the defense ships. He watched the news and remembered that day 50 years ago. He wondered if anyone else remembered. The Krell arrived like a dark wave. 3 swarm groups dropped out of jump space and filled the system with their crystal ships. The human fleet looked like toys compared to them. Shaw gave the order to attack because what else could they do? Human ships charged forward with railguns blazing. They fought like cornered animals and destroyed Krell vessels, but paid a terrible price. Within 20 minutes, half the human fleet was gone. Then the impossible happened. Jump points started opening everywhere. Hundreds of them. Thousands of them. Vadrian ships came first, bringing their entire fleet. Then came the Turians, who humans had helped 10 years ago. The Zenthian hive mind sent their bioships. The Orlax, who never helped anyone, showed up with quantum destroyers. Species from across the galaxy arrived at Earth. Some sent 1 ship. Some sent 100. But they all came. Threnval's voice echoed across every channel in the system. He said that 50 years ago humans taught the galaxy a lesson about not abandoning others in darkness. Today the galaxy remembered. The battle lasted 16 hours and became the biggest fight in galactic history. 42 species fought side by side using human tactics. Shaw's ship was destroyed, but he kept commanding from a Vadrian dreadnought. Nicole's carrier was crippled, but her fighters kept launching. Chris Murphy died destroying the Krell Central Nexus. When the last Krell ship fell, Earth was saved. Millions had died, but humanity survived. A memorial was built on Mars listing every species that came and every person who fell. At the center was a simple plaque with Jake's old words. "We don't leave people to die when we can help." The galaxy never forgot when humans repaid a debt. But more than that, the galaxy learned what debt really meant. Not a transaction, but a promise that all life matters simply because it is the right thing to do. The years after the war changed everything. The Galactic Council rebuilt itself from the ground up. The old ways where ancient species ruled over younger ones died with the Krell. Now every species had an equal voice no matter how long they had been flying through space. Humans were given a permanent seat on the council not because they demanded it, but because every other species insisted. They had earned it with blood and sacrifice. Admiral Kyle Shaw became fleet commander and worked with Vadrian engineers to build new defenses. But more important than weapons or shields was the mutual defense coalition he created. It was a promise written into law that no species would ever face extinction alone again. If one was threatened, then all would respond. Jake Morrison lived long enough to see the memorial dedication on Mars. He was 90 years old and his body was failing, but his mind was still sharp. Threnville stood beside him, and the ancient Vadrian was now one of the oldest living beings in the galaxy. They did not say much to each other. They did not need to. The bond between their people spoke louder than words ever could. Nicole Sanders took command of a new carrier called the Remembrance. She trained young officers and made sure they understood the lessons of the war. That cooperation was stronger than any weapon. That helping others was not weakness, but the foundation of true strength. Laura Mitchell became Earth's voice on the council. Her first act was proposing the Sanctuary Initiative. Every species would have evacuation plans and support systems ready. Every world would have allies who would come if darkness fell. The proposal passed without a single vote against it. The Krell were pushed back beyond the galactic rim over the next decade. Not by one species or one fleet, but by dozens of civilizations working as one. The swarm learned that this galaxy would not be consumed. It would fight back. Years later, a young Vadrian student asked Threnville why his people had risked everything for humanity. The old counselor's answer was recorded and taught in schools across 1,000 worlds. He said that 50 years before the war, he was on a dying ship. A young human commander with a tiny vessel chose to save them even though it might kill his own crew. That human did not want rewards or fame. He just saw people who needed help and he acted. That day, Threnville learned that humanity's greatest strength was not their weapons or tactics, but their refusal to abandon others. When Earth faced death, the galaxy remembered that lesson. They remembered what it meant to be truly civilized. Emma Morrison took command of her own ship when she turned 30. As she left Earth orbit, she passed the memorial on Mars and thought about her grandfather. He had no idea that his simple choice would one day save billions of lives. The galaxy never forgot, and neither would she.